Hey mushroom nerds, it's Anna McHugh. I have a really special mushroom that I want to share with you. So this is Tylopilus williamsii, so like the last name Williams with a double I on the end. I am not aware of this mushroom having a common name, and it is bitter and so inedible, but it's really special because it is scientifically important that I found it in Raleigh, North Carolina. So Tylopilus williamsii is part of a genus, Tylopilus, that is bolete-type mushroom, so it's got a spongy undersurface. And we have a whole mess of Tylopilus species in North Carolina. So Tylopilus plumbeoviolaceus, which is a beautiful purple mushroom with a streaky stem that I've talked about before. We also have Tylopilus felleus, which is sort of brown and not super distinctive and very, very bitter. And then this Tylopilus williamsii, however, is a mushroom that's really known from parts south. So it's described as being from Mexico, Texas. I think that there's also observations from Florida. So essentially, this is a mushroom that really has not been reported in North Carolina, Piedmont before. And if you know much about the eastern United States, there's a huge transition in the kinds of habitats that you have once you go further and further south. So Texas and Mexico has a different mushroom profile. Certainly anytime I want to really treat myself to like primordial strangeness, I go and look at observations from Florida. And so when I found this Tylopilus mushroom, I was like, okay, so I'm familiar with the genus Tylopilus because it is exceedingly common. And what you have are typically, again, bolete-type mushrooms with this big sponge underneath. And it's in the case of Tylopilus, it tends to be pretty thick. And also sort of purpley tones, often like purple to brown, and then underneath you have a sponge that oftentimes, or more often than not, is sort of a lilac color, and that's the color of the spores. And so that's the case in a lot of the Tylopilus species. I say a lot because it's like we have my overall sort of genus concept for Tylopilus is it's a lilac colored mushroom, can fade out to brown, and has these lilac undersurfaces, except for Tylopilus balloui, I think is how you pronounce it, perhaps not, but the burnt orange bolete is the name for a Tylopilus mushroom that occupies the exact opposite end of the spectrum. So it's bright orange, and it has, I don't know what color the spores are. I think it's a dark brown. But anyway, it's in the same genus, but it is essentially like take the species concept of a lilac-colored mushroom and then flip it on its head, and you have another species in the Tylopilus genus. But anyway, this is a great example of a mushroom that, is not edible, but was really exciting for me to find in my local area. So if you're out mushroom hunting and you find something that, you're unfamiliar with, one of the things that is like the most exciting in the world is to discover that you have stumbled across something rare, either rare because it doesn't, there aren't many fruiting bodies and it's kind of a reclusive organism, or rare because, and this is typically how I feel like I'm contributing to science, rare because it's out of its reported range. And because there aren't very many mushroom hunters, and because there are even fewer mushroom hunters who look at mushrooms sort of from that, like, what is this and how does it play a role in our ecosystem? There are a lot of opportunities, I think, for gathering data about these organisms that we miss. And I didn't mean that as a judgment, because I am definitely offenders, or have offended many times, sort of the notion that you should identify, the lion's share of the mushrooms you find. Like, that's just not possible for me. I think this is one of the reasons I go to mushroom forays. I'm going to the North American Mycological Association's annual foray in a couple of weeks. And one of the benefits of attending a foray or joining a mycological society or a mushroom club is that you have a confluence of people who can get together and identify everything that's found, within a walk. Because if you're an individual like me, I pick up a few mushrooms I'm interested in learning, I pick up anything that's kind of unusual looking, and then I pick up the things, of course, I want to eat. Now, in the case of this Tylopilus, I could not resist it because it had this really sort of as opposed to sort of lilac or lilac brown color, it was really this beautiful plum purple, but light colored on the stem. And so Tylopilus plumbeoviolaceus, which is purple stemmed and sort of drab on the top oftentimes, is like, oh, this is a reverse of that. And also this purple is a little lighter. Another thing that really attracted my attention is how you can see little streaks of where pine straw fell on top of this mushroom, but it left these really attractive sort of yellowish, splotches and patterns. So I was like, that's very, very cool looking. So I'm going to pick it up. And they're just stinking big mushrooms, and they were in really good shape. The other thing about this specific species, just to be aware in case you run into it, so you have this sort of, really attractive purple color. I tried to wash this one off. Oh, this looks brown at this point, but when it dries out, it's kind of this beautiful purpley color, like a new age dress purple. And underneath you have a white spongy layer, but as the mushroom matures, as I mentioned in Tylopilus or in the purple ones, you have a sort of lilac coloration that comes in. And in this case, like this specific specimen, that's kind of faint. Then in addition, you have brown staining typically. So you can see I put a little hashtag with my mushroom knife on the sponge, and it turned sort of this dark brown. But then also you have descriptions of sort of yellowy staining reactions forming. And so that's one of the things, like I collected these mushrooms a couple of days ago and just haven't had time to film them. And then additionally, every time I've gotten set up, it's like the two-stroke orchestra of, leaf blowers and weed whackers, and gosh, they're taking down some trees right next to my house. So these mushrooms have stuck around for a couple of days and they're a little faded, but one of the things that is helpful for is that this yellow staining has really come in. Other things to note about this, so like a lot of your mushrooms that are considered porcini or porcini-like, so like really delicious, mild, oftentimes very large bolete-type mushrooms, most of them have pretty elaborate reticulation or ornamentation on the stem, so sort of a fishnet appearance on top of the stem. This Tylopilus doesn't have any of that. It's just sort of a white situation. And let me see if I can find one that, oh yeah, and also like right at the apex you can see sort of a little ring of this almost purpley color. Let's see, this one's slightly better as far as the purple, so you can see just sort of a dusting of that similar lightish purple coloration. So, on the subject of collecting rare mushrooms, you should not worry about taking a collection for science. These organisms especially are, boletes, and the things you find on the forest floor are very frequently mycorrhizal, meaning that they grow in association with a tree or plant. And so they are intended to be collected by somebody, be it the bugs, be it a mammal, whatever. These mushrooms are created to essentially spread spores. So I never feel bad about collecting mushrooms that, are unusual to me and I want to identify them. I do try to keep them in good condition using my handy dandy wax paper, so you can wrap it up and stick it in a bag and stick it in your fridge for a couple of days and see what happens. Another thing I think actually that's worth mentioning with this mushroom that really impressed me, maybe you even heard that, so this mushroom has like a really good crunch. Oh, that one's a little bit less so. So it's like almost, oh, here we go. So this snaps and you can hear it, and it's, basically you don't see any bug damage whatsoever, no maggots. And this mushroom, it's been around for a couple of days, and again, no maggots whatsoever, no damage from bugs. And that is noteworthy because a lot of boletes, they're basically maggot bombs. And so when you pick them, you'll find from the base of the stem all kinds of little fly larvae, and that can basically permeate the whole mushroom. And, you don't get this, beautiful, consistent sort of cap flesh. Now, as I mentioned, this is not edible, so let's do the obligatory taste test. Yeah. So this is bitter. It is not as bitter as a lot of other Tylopilus mushrooms. So the last video I made, I tested Tylopilus plumbeoviolaceus, or the violet gray bolete, and that one is like sear your face off bitter. This one, on the other hand, is almost mild enough that I would eat it. And so, there's another question in my mind of like, is this technically Tylopilus williamsii, or is it a similar species? Because the descriptions are like, it lives in Texas, it lives in Mexico, and it is a bitter mushroom. And I'm like, this is bitter, but like, some of these are almost borderline, and that's something to note also about Tylopilus is like many are bitter, but a few of them are edible and even choice, because these bolete-type mushrooms can be very tasty. This is definitely, I surmise, it is this species. I did my very best work that I could do with my various mushroom books and the internet to try to verify that, and then checked in with a couple of experts, in the wider sort of forum community, and a couple of people that are extremely trustworthy and write books and like think about mushrooms even more than I do, were like, yes, that is a really remarkable thing to have seen, and I can verify that it is in fact this species. I'm going to show you one more thing. If you are new to mushroom hunting, this might be worth learning if you are in the southeastern US. This is a reishi mushroom. So this is Ganoderma curtisii. It is a wood decomposer that you'll find growing on pieces of wood, oftentimes on stumps. It's called the golden reishi, and I think you can understand why. So a lot of reishi mushrooms, there are several species, including, Ganoderma lucidum is sort of the, I think it's the genus concept for Ganoderma, this genus, but it tends to be more of a mahogany color. And, with Ganoderma lucidum and other reishi type mushrooms, what you have with Ganoderma curtisii is a fruiting body that's really kind of woody and corky, and it's got this nice mahogany color, and it's varnished. And so, you have a lot of these mushrooms that are kind of woody and have a porous, polyporous undersurface, so no gills or anything. A lot of them are matte or not shiny. So, with Ganoderma curtisii, you have a mushroom that oftentimes grows in this kind of cool Loch Ness Monster front of the Starship Enterprise shape. And you'll see this emerging from a stump or something, always hardwood as far as, well, no, I lied. There are some of these that grow on pine, but very frequently you'll find them growing on, hardwood stumps. And as I mentioned, a porous undersurface, and then these really attractive zones of growth. And in the case of the golden reishi, Ganoderma curtisii, those zones tend to be really sort of golden in color. Here is a smaller one that is also more fresh. So if you're interested in reishi from a medicinal perspective, you want to collect them probably when they're a little bigger than this. This guy just never really sprouted. I kept an eye on them for a few days. But what you're looking for if you're interested in making teas or tinctures is fruiting bodies that have a white undersurface. So this one has been around for quite a while. It's very tough at this point. But when they're a little bit younger, they're a little more flexible, and you can chop them up and make them into teas and things if you're so inclined. So I think that's all I have to say. Again, on the subject of sort of rare mushrooms, it's really one of my favorite moments of last mushroom hunting season was finding a destroying angel, which is a very dangerous poisonous mushroom, but a species that I was, again, reporting in from mushroom land saying, hey, I think I found Amanita magnivolaris, which is this giant, really beautiful destroying angel mushroom. And there was a lot of hemming and hawing from various experts, and finally it's no, if we showed you the size and you've demonstrated that it has these features. And then I was granted the right to be excited about it. Also at the beginning of this summer, I found a mushroom. It looks very much like Galeella rufa. So Galeella rufa is known as the peanut butter cup mushroom. It's this little wiggly jiggly dude. And I found and it's super duper common. It grows everywhere at certain times of year. And I found a mushroom that looked kind of similar, but was not jiggly so much, and it had this yellow surface inside of the cup. And I was like, oh, that's kind of peculiar. And I took a couple of pictures, and then I was at a place where I wasn't allowed to collect mushrooms. So I'm like, I'm going to follow the rules and leave it here. But, it's kind of plain, and it doesn't look like it's super special. But it was special enough that I was like, I'm going to post the pictures to the internet. And it caused not an explosion of excitement, but at least a number of people saying, oh, that is a rare mushroom in your area, and this is something we're trying to gather observations and gather data about. So, thumbs up for you. It's too bad that you didn't collect it, and too bad for science that you didn't collect it. But that is another matter. The subject of citizen science and our use of public spaces is not something that I'm prepared to talk about this morning. But nonetheless, I think it's really important to know that when you're looking at and observing mushrooms, sometimes they can look very drab and very uninteresting, but there is always a possibility that it is interesting simply because it occupies a space in our, ecosystems that we are not aware of. I think the one final thing actually that I'll say on the subject of feeling okay about collecting some of these mushrooms if you want to study them, first of all, try to study them, obviously. And if you don't put them in the trash, put them in your yard. But then additionally, when it comes to these mycorrhizal species, it's not as though someone can say, oh yeah, that's an invasive, it came in with the wood mulch. This is a mushroom that has a long-term mycorrhizal relationship with the oak trees that were living right next to it. And so, when I go out with plant people, it's really weird because they have to deal with, I think, the pain of invasive species. And so, if I'm mushroom hunting with plant people, I'll oftentimes be, taking pictures of mushrooms, and I'm very excited and just, full of childlike wonder and joy. And I turn around and my plant friends people are, a little bit upset, and they're pulling stilt grass and they're pointing out, invasive species all around us. And I'm not trying to denigrate that by any means. And I've been trying to learn my plants and learn to identify, what is invasive so I can get rid of it when I can. But the nice thing for me is I can observe these organisms, and if they are mycorrhizal, I can say they didn't just move in, or if they did, it takes such a long time that it's, Amanita phalloides, the death cap mushroom, that is actually a mycorrhizal mushroom that is quote unquote moved in and, is invasive, but invasive in a way that is we're talking about a very, very long period of time. And additionally, the damage that is caused by mycorrhizal fungi to native species of trees, that's not really something we're worried about because typically that symbiotic relationship is good for both partners, both tree and mushroom, whether or not the mushroom is, a local or not. But again, I think that's one of the things I love about mushroom hunting is it really opens up these opportunities to interact with my environment in a way that is unexpected because I'm observing things, but I don't know their relative importance. And also, once you start to notice them, you notice them everywhere. And a couple of weeks ago, I went on a really fun camping trip with some mushroom friends, and we were talking around the campfire about our, how did you get bitten? How did you get the mushroom bug? And I was describing this experience of learning about mushrooms in a very rudimentary way, like picking up a field guide at a party, and I was just leafing through it and found chicken of the woods, which is a giant orange mushroom that's edible, in the pages of that book. And I'm like, that's really weird. I was homeschooled in, Western Pennsylvania in my early childhood, so I was outside all the time. I've always been a kid who wandered around in the woods, and I'm like, I've never seen that giant orange thing in the woods before. And what do you know, 2 weeks later, that I found one that was nearly 4 feet wide on a felled Douglas fir tree. And this is in Oregon, just so you know, Laetiporus conifericola. So conifer growing, West Coast, chicken of the woods, absolutely ginormous. And I'm like, how did I not notice this? There is no way that I've spent as much time in the woods as I have up until this point in my, late 20s. That I've never noticed this. And it's only because, again, you start looking for them and then you see them and then you're like, this entire system that I'm observing is really facile to me. And of course, when I'm observing plant people pulling invasives, I'm like, they have another perspective that they've been developing, and that gives them also a really sense of where our ecosystems, plant-wise, are damaged or compromised, what species are supplanting others, and sort of the downstream impacts of all of that. So I admire it, and I think it's interesting. It was also fun when I told that story. One of the other people at this camping trip was like, I know, how is it chicken of the woods existed my entire life and I didn't see it? How did I not see it? So anyway, it's as bright as a bus. So look for chicken of the woods and look for buses when you cross the street. Tylopilus williamsii, this has really made my week because it's been very, very, very hot and not all that rainy. So I'm really pleased to have found something that brought some joy to me, brought a little bit of excitement from other people when I shared it to them or with them online, and hopefully you too. And again, Ganoderma curtisii, if you're in our area, you're gonna just find it stinking everywhere. So that's just another side note if you're just getting started and starting to notice these organisms yourself for the very first time. Have a good day. We'll talk soon.